And I guess that kind of brings us on to the last sort of bit to discuss, is what are the government going to do now? Sure. I must admit, I think while the market's frothy, I think they're going to hold off. At the end of the day, we all have to understand they've put a huge amount of money in. Yeah. And if I think as an industry, we have to be responsible and only ask them for money if we think it will make them more money. So for me, in the last recession, they did a guarantor for lenders who were lending at 95% loan to value. Right. So if they lost money for any reason, such as, like, for example, a repossession, then my understanding was the government would pay that money out, which very rarely happened. So that supported 95% coming in. It also was done at the same time as Help to Buy, so it did help get everybody back into the market. And
do you see something like that coming back?
I hope so. Yeah. Particularly with the Nationwide. I thought we'd probably got a few months before we needed to ask for stuff and help. But with Nationwide doing what they're doing, I think that should be a priority, really, because the first-time buyers, whatever anybody says, do hold the market up. Yeah. And they were about 30-35% of the market before we went into COVID lockdown. So that, and I think the other question, I don't know what you think about this, is politically, it's been missed a bit, really, but lenders can't repossess a property currently, can they?
No.
Just a bit like a landlord can't get an eviction. And my thoughts are, well, I think they're going to have to keep extending that, because homelessness is already up something like 165% from 2010 up until we went into lockdown. And to be fair, they have done a lot to try and help homeless people over that period of time, which is good. But there is nowhere to put people if lenders start repossessing. So I'm kind of wondering if they're going to have to extend that for some period of time. And then, of course, if you don't get loads of repossessed properties, that kind of keeps the market price up, because repossessions are the real driver of prices down, typically during a recession. Yeah. So I don't know how you think about that, but I think they're going to put lenders under quite a lot of pressure to not repossess, just as they have landlords.
Yeah. They're going to have to do something, aren't they? Because I think a lot of these government initiatives they put in, obviously they're brilliant for propping up the economy in the short term, but it almost feels like a lot of the economic implications of this recession, whether it's going to be a short recession, a long recession, no one quite knows. Yeah. It almost feels like they've just kicked the can down the road, really. So until we start seeing, once those initiatives are reduced, what effect it's going to have, like you say, on the ability for tenants to pay, are landlords going to be able to keep up their mortgage payments, they're going to have to repossess. Until we see those play out, we don't really know what the full impact is of that. We're all sort
and it's the hard thing for anybody making a decision at the moment is we're not going to know till kind of October. I've looked at the numbers, and usually they're a kind of month, 2 months behind. So we're not really going to know till October, November time exactly what's going to happen in the housing market. We know what the current situation is. It's a frothy market. It will probably slow down August time. And we'll start seeing the real market coming through till September. Now, that's why I'm saying it's October, November until we see the real stats. And that kind of those forecast predictions of falls, I don't think are going to hit till then. But then ironically, of course, from a valuation perspective, all your data will be telling you is there haven't been house price falls in the first 3 months post lockdown. So it's kind of a quirky situation we've never dealt with before. Do you think the government? What would you like the government to do? What would you like to see?
I think there's got to be some assistance brought back to landlords in one shape or form. Because obviously over the last few years, we had a lot of stuff that negatively impacted them, from the additional stamp duty, the removal of the tax relief on interest payments. Unless they're going to want to punish landlords more and sort of trying to push them out of the market or make it a more professional market, they're going to have to bring something back in to keep landlords in the market and to be able to support them. Like you say, if there's an increase in demand for rental property, or if they're having tenants that are struggling to pay, but the landlord can't do anything and they can't even get the tenant out to get a new one, then there's going to have to be some sort of legislation to normalise that situation, whether it's the government helping the tenant and taking on the housing benefit, or whether it's through the landlord by getting deferred mortgage payments. But we've already discussed the implications of them doing that.
Yes, yeah. I think that they were very quick actually, because they've said, oh, renters weren't looked after, but actually they, certainly on the vulnerable side, they were. So for those on benefits, they were very quick to make the changes on the local housing allowance. And they were quite startling. I looked, and I think it's Northwest Kent. The fact that they'd not increased, they'd frozen the local housing allowance for 4 years, and then they took that freeze off and applied the sort of inflationary side of things, that was taking it up by, in that area, by 255 quid a month.
Oh, wow.
Now, I have to say, in some areas, it was 12p extra you'd get as a landlord. Not a big, I think that was Port Talbot. But actually, it shows how much some tenants and indeed landlords have been utterly squeezed renting to those on universal credit. And often landlords are accused of discriminating against tenants who are on benefits. And of course, they're not discriminating against the tenants, they're discriminating because financially the benefit system doesn't support them as well as the private rented sector. But of course, that balance has changed a little bit. So I think the helping tenants keep in their property or on universal credit, I think you're right. That's one area I think they will help them with. But I do have a fear for any landlord in particular or any investor that isn't taking good, solid tax advice at the moment, because I think the future one, they're going to hit them on capital gains. They've got to pay this money back somehow. And although they're going to need a rental business and sector, strong rental sector for the next year or so, my fear is that they're going to come after them on the capital gains side. That will be the next take. And they'll be more generous maybe on local housing allowance, things like that, but less generous when it comes to capital gains. They've got to get the money back somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, all these economic initiatives they've made, but like I say, it's costing money and they're going to get it back one way or another. I don't think we're going to see income tax rising, especially for the lower rate earners. No. It's going to be via other means, like you say, the capital gains or inheritance tax, or who knows.
Yeah.
Interesting. Just on the local authority lets, we've actually seen a lot of portfolio landlords actually preferring to rent properties to local housing associations now, even though they're getting less than market rent. That often those contracts come with 5-year commitments. The housing providers responsible for all the maintenance and the tenant source and everything else. A lot of them are willing to get that reduced market rent for the security of knowing that that's secured for the next 5 years.
Yeah, it makes sense. And financially, that can be backed, can it, mortgage-wise?
It can, yeah. So traditionally, a lot of lenders weren't very happy with sort of housing association or local authority lets, but now they're actually quite open to them. From their perspective, I guess it's less risk because it's guaranteed for the next 5 years.
Yeah. So any nervous landlords at the moment with worry of voids or stuff can come and have a chat to you about how they could maybe switch strategy a little bit.
Yeah, certainly. We've assisted many. I mean, it's not for all lenders, but there's many lenders that do accept it. So
yeah, and it is to some extent. It's not that the risk is lower for universal credit now. It's just that the risk is higher for a private tenant who might lose their job. So it's kind of starting to balance out a little bit more from their perspective. And anything else? Any sort of tips or anything for investors, landlords moving forward on the kind of financial side? Do you think in a few months' time it might be the time to really go for it, or? Terrible question to ask.
Yeah, put me on the spot a bit here. It's hard to say, really. I mean, look, from what we've seen, like I said, lenders are being supportive again in the market. We're not seeing the higher LTVs that we saw pre-lockdown, 80, 85%. So landlords are going to have to put in cash into the property. The common one we're seeing is that for whatever property that you're purchasing, it needs to have positive cash flow from day one. Okay. Lenders aren't particularly supportive at the moment of projects that are only going to come to fruition and income producing 6 months, 9 months, 12 months down the line, simply because they're uncertain of what the current stock is going to do and what the demand is going to be. So they're not too supportive of new stock coming onto the market. So, you know, like I say, there is still homes for most cases, and you know, you can get the borrowing. Property price wise, though, who knows? You know,
Absolutely, it is a
thing at the moment. I think
it's a tough one, isn't it? And I think, like we say, it's all down to, I've looked at some properties, because we're in this weird situation whereby normally a recession, everybody's income lowers and everybody's in danger, if you like, more risk. Whereas actually we've got part of the economy doing incredibly well. So anybody in retailing, it's like Christmas every week at this moment in time. So they're kind of fine. Clearly, doctors, nurses, anybody in the NHS, public service, again, pretty good position to be in currently. But, you know, obviously anybody, I think I looked at Southampton, whereas in the centre of Southampton, they had the NHS and some of the other people that were there, people like B&Qs, that kind of thing. They're solid providers for the future. So they were fine in the centre, but near the ports, of course, massive cruise liner business. And of course, they're in huge amounts of trouble. So you can kind of imagine, I think landlords, anybody in property investment at the moment has got to realise that all the stuff we're going to hear in the papers really over the next few months is kind of irrelevant. And you've got to get those numbers right, like you say. And if you can show it turns a profit, but it is, I guess, cash is king really over the next 6 months. This isn't a time necessarily for somebody who's thinking of borrowing some money on a credit card as they did in the old days, and sticking that down as a deposit and or a bounce back loan or anything else. This is kind of for those that really know what they're doing or have very good advisors around them like yourselves.
I mean, you know, if you've got a proven track record as a landlord, and you know you've got positive cash flow, good cash reserves, lenders are still being very supportive of you. So no issues there. And just going back on what you said earlier about sort of the economic impacts, I've seen some data that says it's almost like a tale of two sides at the moment, where you've got some people are actually better off as a result of the lockdown, because they haven't had the cost of commuting, they haven't been going socialising, restaurants, they haven't gone on the foreign holidays, so they might actually have cash reserves increased compared to pre-lockdown.
There's a great stat from Halifax. I hope Halifax, I remember this correctly. I think people's had 11% more savings now than they had pre-lockdown for exactly that reason. I have to say, I did spend some of mine. I did spend more on wine and fizz, because I do quite like fizz, than I would normally do. So I did treat myself because I wasn't going anywhere. So that was quite nice. But yeah, I think there are potentially upsides that we don't know about yet. We kind of hear all the downsides, but some of the upsides we haven't heard. And I suppose, just to kind of finish, where are we on offices these days?
Sure.
Is London going to empty and Buckingham Palace and everywhere else turn into a big HMO or something? What do you reckon?
Do you know what? With the high street retail and offices in general, almost in a way, this lockdown has sort of brought forward the eventual and slow decline of retail and office space, I think. And the reason I say that is because late adopters to online shopping, for whatever reason they didn't like to do it, a lot of people have been forced to do so in the lockdown. So you've got a lot of people that previously weren't doing online shopping now are. So that could just exacerbate the decline of the high street. With offices, we've already had many large businesses already come out to say that, you know, working from home or working remotely is going to be a permanent. I think Google came out to say that, you know.
Really? I missed that one.
Yeah.
I did hear one finance company, and they put their notice into their own landlord to say they were quitting their offices. And I think a lot of people that thought nobody's going to be productive at home including themselves as bosses, have really realised the huge benefits. I mean, I've been doing it for way too long, but so I don't know that I could actually cope in an office these days.
Yeah,
but finally, everybody's caught up with the trend I set 20 years ago. But I also think that's a massive opportunity to prevent potentially for investors as well, because there could be some amazing quality stock coming on, which could potentially, in areas like London, solve some of the real poor housing issues that we have.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're going to see a large increase in sort of office to resi conversions over the coming years. I mean, for businesses that are going to be vacating office, I mean, I can understand why as well. You know, you've got the cost factor, you know, of not having that. It could be up to, you know, 10-20% of their turnover is going on that. Environmental implications as well, people not having to travel, commute every day, and the time saving as well, you know, for people that might be commuting into the city an hour and a half each day.
I remember,
you know, that's 3 hours of their life for the rest of their working life that they're potentially going to gain back. You know, that's a substantial amount of time, isn't it? So,
so were you commuting?
Not far though, no. So
okay, so you're all right. I'm all right.
Yeah. No, I do think we are. It's like you say, there will be a greater amount of office space coming onto market. You know, with the intention that it could be converted to residential. It could solve a lot of the housing supply issues that we see in some overpopulated areas.
Definitely. So I hope that's given you some insight into my thoughts, some insight into Jack's thoughts. You've got a good idea now of where the market might go, albeit we won't know really till October, November. You've got a good idea on what's happening on financing, and particularly on the stories about sort of bounce back loans and issues with deferred payment. And some ideas of some opportunities, such as the office to resi conversion. Cash is king, I think we've agreed, over the next 5 to 6 months. But if you've done a good job in property over the last few years, then there's money out there to support you. This isn't a credit crunch like we had in the past. And the government's keen to back anything that will improve the economy, of which housing's been recognised as one of the first markets to open. So I hope that was useful. Jack, always great to chat to you. Thank you for your insight. And look forward to speaking soon.
All right. Many thanks, Kate.
Cheers.
Cheers.